Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now I'm in Verdi, California, standing on the California-Nevada state line. So recently we visited the four corners of California, but according to the late Huell Howser, who was the host of California's Gold, California actually has 5 corners, because south of here at Lake Tahoe, the north-south California border makes an abrupt turn to the east. So today, we're going to head about 45 minutes south of here and explore Lake Tahoe in California and try and visit California's 5th corner. Verdi is a pretty important place in California's history. The first wagon train to cross the Sierras came through here in 1844, and later the ill-fated Donner Party came through here as well. This was known as the Dutch Flat Wagon Road, and automobiles began using it in 1901, and in 1913 it became part of the original alignment of the Lincoln Highway. From 1864 to 1926, this was one of the busiest roads to get to California from the east. Alexei von Schmidt was tasked with surveying California's eastern border in 1872, and this is where he started his survey. The reason he started here is because there was a telegraph in Verdi. As part of his survey, he placed markers along the state line. Most were just simple monuments made of rocks, but in 4 spots he placed cast iron obelisks, and amazingly, the one he placed where he started still stands. The California state line north of Lake Tahoe was set at 120 longitude. The problem was, in the time before GPS, pinpointing 120 longitude was extremely difficult. Von Schmidt didn't get it exactly right, but his survey would eventually become the official state line north of Lake Tahoe 108 years later. Now that we've seen von Schmidt's monument, I think it's time to head to the lake. So we're now due south of where we started, and we've made it to Lake Tahoe. So let's start exploring the lake as we make our way closer to California's 5th corner. Here's our first look at the lake. Because it's a little cold out, it doesn't look like anyone's at the beach today. As we drive around Lake Tahoe, I'll try to give a little bit more information on the history of the state line and why it is where it is out in the middle of Lake Tahoe. When California was separated from the territory that the United States acquired from Mexico in the Mexican-American War, instead of geography such as the Sierra Nevada mountains to set the boundary of the state, it was decided that arbitrary lines on the map would be used instead. The drafters of California's Constitution knew they couldn't get away with making the state too big, but they were still somewhat greedy. They knew by using the 120th meridian, they could lay claim to pretty much the entire Sierras and whatever gold the mountains may have. Also, they wanted to make sure what would become Lake Tahoe, which was only discovered 5 years earlier, would be included in the state. So it was decided that the eastern border of California would follow the 120th meridian south from the border of the Oregon Territory until it reached the 39th parallel, where it would turn in a straight line to the southeast until it hit the Colorado River. The boundary would then follow the river until it reached Mexico. The problem was, the eastern part of what would become California was little explored, and figuring out where the border was would prove to be a challenge that would cause issues for the next 130 years. Because the area was so little explored, the plan to claim Lake Tahoe hit a bit of a problem too. And it looks like we've reached our first stop, which is that large rock towering over the road. This is the Eagle Rock Trail. It's supposed to be a short 15-minute or so hike to the top, where it said there are some amazing views of Lake Tahoe. And there's the top right up there. This may be a short hike, but it looks like it's going to be a steep one. Around the lake, it's so built up with houses everywhere so far. You definitely don't come to Tahoe to get away from people. But it's nice that there are trails like this where you can at least get away for a few minutes. If you could find parking, I guess. We're near the top, and what was a nice smooth trail has gotten a bit rougher. But we are starting to get some good views of the lake, and it's only been about 15 minutes or so since we started walking. We've made it to the top. And they weren't kidding about the views of Lake Tahoe from up here. This is pretty spectacular. It's a little windy, so I don't want to get too close to the edge. There's a plaque here. It was definitely worth it to hike up here for this view. You really get an idea of just how large Lake Tahoe is. It's actually the largest lake by volume in the United States outside of the Great Lakes. And that's because of how deep it is. It's the third deepest lake in North America and the 10th deepest in the world. It is quite the drop from up here. I've moved over to the other peak, other side, and here's the survey marker. And here's the view from this side. There's the road we traveled on. And somewhere out there, somewhere in front of us, I'm not sure where, is where the state line makes its turn. Getting back to the history and why the state line is where it is. The Washoe people had lived in the Lake Tahoe area for probably 10,000 years or more, but the first non-natives to see the lake were the American explorers John C. Fremont and Charles Preuss in 1844. They didn't actually visit the lake, but saw it from the top of Red Lake Peak, which is about 20 miles away. Fremont named it Mountain Lake, and Preuss called it Lake Bonpland after a botanist. Fremont estimated the lake to be 15 miles in length, which is off by about 7 miles. Because of the discrepancy, when California set its borders, it thought that all of the lake would be in California. And a quick side note on Fremont, thanks to his fame as an explorer, he became one of the first 2 senators from California, and was the first Republican presidential candidate in 1856, losing to James Buchanan. In 1854, the name of the lake was officially changed to Lake Bigler, named for John Bigler, who was the governor of California at the time. That would probably be the name today, but when the American Civil War started in 1861, Bigler sympathized with the Confederates. Unionists didn't want his name on the maps anymore, and in 1862, a map maker for the Department of the Interior changed the name on all federal maps to Lake Tahoe. The name Lake Tahoe wasn't universally liked, however. Mark Twain hated the name and wrote about how terrible the name was several times. But it became the accepted name for the lake, and in 1945, California officially changed the name from Lake Bigler to Lake Tahoe. We have now stopped at Sugar Pine Point State Park to get a closer look at the lake. This area is also where the non-native settlement of the lake began. There's been news recently of Mark Zuckerberg spending tens of millions of dollars on a house here. But the rich buying up land and building large houses here has been happening for a long time. This has been a resort destination since the 1800s. For some reason, they filled the inside of this tree with, looks like, just like concrete blocks. I guess they want to keep this tree up, but there's no sign or anything explaining why. We'll go out into the lake by taking a walk on this pier. It's a pretty windy day and the lake seems pretty choppy, and we haven't seen many boats out, which is kind of a bad omen for us, but we'll see. Let's take a look at the water and I'll show you how clear it is. Tahoe is famous for its clear water. Had we come here in the early 1900s, we'd have had to have taken a train from San Francisco to Truckee, then another train from Truckee to the lake. Once we arrived at Tahoe, we'd then have to get on a steamboat to bring us here. In the early 1900s, the lake was filled with steamboats traveling across it. And you might be wondering why we'd want to go through all that trouble. Well, that was the only way to get to that mansion on the hill. In 1897, San Francisco businessman I.W. Hellman began buying property here and built this mansion in 1903. After Hellman died, his youngest daughter Florence Ehrman inherited the property, and she owned it until her death in 1964. The state of California bought the land and the house from the family in 1965. And here is the view from the mansion. This mansion's pretty impressive, and surprisingly there's not very many people here. Everywhere else we've been on Lake Tahoe today has just been packed with people, but there's only a few people here walking around. This cabin belonged to General Phipps, who was the first non-native settler at Lake Tahoe. And you can see why he chose this spot. Apparently his rank of general was self-proclaimed, but he came to California in 1854, and determined to live the life of a mountain man, he moved here in 1860. This is his second cabin, built in 1872. When the mansion was built, this was used as servants' quarters. Here's the ice house for the mansion. Back when the mansion was built, there were no freezers or refrigerators, so they have had this separate building to store their ice. We'll take a look inside. And you can't really see much of it, but there's some of the old ice cutting tools. I just noticed this behind the visitor center. I'm not sure what this is. This may be where trash was burned. The visitor center, which I'll show you in just a minute, is in the building that used to be the power plant for the mansion. And I can't read what it says from this angle, but maybe we could see on the camera. But if you know what this is, let me know in the comments. There's also some old machinery back here. This has to be from when this was a power plant. And I'm not sure what would have been here. But here's the back of the visitor center, which was once a steam-generated power plant. And here's the front of the visitor center. Here's an example of a traditional Washoe shelter. The Washoe people lived in this area for thousands of years, but the California gold rush was disastrous for them, and by the mid-1860s, this area was overrun by mining, logging, and settlers. Once they began surveying the area in the 1850s, they realized the state line goes through the middle of the lake. None of the surveys that were done could agree on exactly where the state line was, though, and the border changed a number of times over the years. The Supreme Court settled the matter in 1980, with Alexi von Schmidt's 1872 survey becoming the official state line north of Lake Tahoe, and a survey that was done in the 1890s becoming the official state line south of the lake. Below us is Emerald Bay, and that is the only island on Lake Tahoe. There are also the ruins of a small building on that island that was used as a tea house. There's also a castle down there called Vikingsholm, but there's no parking available, so we're going to skip that today. This video isn't meant to be an in-depth guide to everything to see around Lake Tahoe. There is so much to see and do here, it would take days to see it all. And we still need to get closer to that corner. We're making a quick stop at the Tallac Historic Site, which consists of 3 summer homes built by wealthy California families between 1894 and 1923. This is the Baldwin Estate, built in 1924. There aren't many really old buildings around Lake Tahoe because the area has seen a number of large fires over the years, so it's great to see a few here. We are here a little late for the tour, unfortunately. And this is the Pope Estate. This was built in 1894, making it one of the oldest buildings in the Lake Tahoe area. Check out the design on this cabin. This was apparently used as a playroom for the kids. I doubt this place would have looked much different had we come here in the 1920s. But this is what early 1900s wealth could get you. We're coming up on South Lake Tahoe, which is the largest town around the lake, and we're close to getting back to the state line. We've made it to the other side of Lake Tahoe, and we're back at the state line. And that means there's only one thing left to do, and that's to try to get out on the lake and visit the actual corner in the middle of Lake Tahoe. And I have no idea how we're going to do this because we haven't booked anything. So we've made it over to the marina, but unfortunately it looks like no more boats are going out on the lake today because of high winds. So I guess we're going to be spending the night here at Lake Tahoe and trying again in the morning. Well, it's the next day. We're back down here, and last night we called and messaged a bunch of different companies. Someone got back to us. We kind of explained what we wanted to do. So we're down here to meet them, and hopefully in just a little bit we'll be heading out onto the lake and going to the exact corner of California. Now the weather doesn't look any better than it did yesterday, so I think we probably have a rough ride ahead of us, but I guess we'll see. All right, so we're heading out onto the lake. Next stop, California's fifth corner. The water's definitely a lot calmer than I was expecting. Also, if anyone's looking to charter a boat to head out onto Lake Tahoe, I highly recommend Flip's Boats. He's the only one who contacted us back when I mentioned what we were looking to do, so I'll put a link to his info in the description. I asked the captain if anyone's ever asked to be taken out to the corner on the state line before, and he just laughed and said, "No, we're the first." We're about on the state line now, and we're going to follow it all the way to the corner. It's gotten a little rougher out here at the state line. I think it's the California water pushing against the Nevada water. So we're just about there, and I can tell you this, the fifth corner of California is cold and wet. All right, this is it. We're there. This is what the corner of California looks like in the middle of Lake Tahoe. The water's about 1,600 feet deep right here, but we're looking right about where the exact corner is. Everything in front of us right now is in Nevada. And now directly in front of us is the state line, and everything on the right of the screen is in California. And here's the view of California from the corner. We're filming this in August, and we thought it would be warm. It is not warm. So that's our look at California's fifth corner out on Lake Tahoe. And it looks like I will be bringing some of the lake back with me. But thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.